Tonight, overcharged and underprotected. The former head of the ACCC calls for tough new laws to defend Australians from price gouging. A royal reunion. Prince Harry visits his father following the King's cancer diagnosis. Hamas said to be positive about the latest framework for a ceasefire as Israel releases new details on the fate of the hostages in Gaza. A landmark verdict in the US where the mother of a school shooter has been found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. And Mr Ponting goes to Washington, the Aussie cricket great, to coach in America's T20 league. Good evening, Jeremy Fernandez with ABC News. The former head of the nation's consumer watchdog says Australian consumers are being overcharged because of a lack of competition. In a blistering 80-page report into price gouging, Professor Alan Fels takes aim at some of Australia's biggest companies, including banks, supermarkets and airlines. He wants the government to step in, saying Australians are paying too much, too often.
2 for 5 strawberries.
The public outrage is loud and clear.
The big corporations are taking us to the cleaners. It's over for the little fella. It's over.
And now there is higher calls for change.
The Australian government needs to act. Australians are paying prices that are too high, too often. And the cause is weak and ineffective competition.
Professor Fell's report into price gouging is scathing. Its targets include energy retailer AGL, the major supermarkets and Qantas.
They have squandered some of their good name as a national champion.
The founding chair of the ACCC wants to make it an offence to charge excessive prices. A review of the electricity sector's wholesale market, and tougher laws that allow big business to be broken up if they've abused their market power.
Business pricing has contributed significantly to inflation.
The union that commissioned Fell's report is also agitating for change, while big business is claiming bias.
We are extremely sceptical about the report that Professor Fels has produced. I think it's ironic to hold an inquiry like this and to find that it comes out with recommendations for at least another 13 reviews or inquiries.
The Fels report isn't binding, but it does come as the government conducts its own inquiries into merger laws and supermarket pricing. Professor Fels says the vulnerable are paying the price for rising inflation. Charities are being inundated by needy people who can't afford the rising cost of living, like pensioner Peter Richards.
We all matter. It's not just bucks and profit. So you just look at us little people.
Rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. I'm just hoping that big businesses and others can understand the desperate need.
A reminder that profit pushing has a price. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
King Charles has been seen in public for the first time since his cancer diagnosis. The news has triggered a flood of well wishes and a reunion with his estranged son, Prince Harry. Some royal watchers say this diagnosis may help the family heal their well-publicised rift.
The King spotted for the first time since announcing his cancer battle, and he was all smiles. The 75-year-old and his wife waved to onlookers outside Buckingham Palace. All eyes were on the royal reunion. Prince Harry landed in London after learning of his dad's diagnosis, the Duke of Sussex arriving at his father's residence alone and leaving less than an hour later. It's the first time the pair is believed to have met since the coronation in May, but it's understood he has no plans to see his brother, Prince William.
This whole family feud seems a bit silly in my opinion. They should make up and hopefully this brings them together a little bit more.
Many families have grim diagnoses of horrible diseases and what tends to happen is that you park the minor grievances and get on with the big stuff. So I think he'd be delighted that he's got both of his sons back on home soil.
Other royals were stepping up.
Your Royal Highness, how is the King?
Princess Anne attending multiple public events in England. While well-wishers poured in from around the world, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reassured the public he's in regular contact with the King and revealed he caught his cancer in the early stages.
Obviously, like everyone else, shocked and sad, and just all our thoughts are with him and his family. And, thankfully, this has been caught early.
There's been no further updates from the palace on the King's health, and it's expected that from this point forward, many details of his treatment and recovery will be kept private. Charles and Camilla left London for their Sandringham estate in the countryside, where the King can get peace and privacy between treatments. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, London.
A ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza war could be a step closer. Hamas militants are said to be positive about a new framework for a ceasefire. While details of the deal have not been released publicly, the negotiations come as Israeli defence confirms the deaths of more hostages.
A glimmer of hope after 4 gruelling months. Hamas militants react to a proposal to once again pause fighting in the Gaza Strip.
The response includes some comments on the framework, but in its entirety, it is a positive response.
While those involved are not saying much, US President Joe Biden says the demands are being considered.
It seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now.
The deal, put together by Israel, the US, Qatar and Egypt, is believed to include a 6-week truce and another exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners. It can't come any sooner for Israelis being held captive by Hamas. The IDF has confirmed that 136 hostages remain, with fears that as many as 31 are dead.
The proposal for a ceasefire was sent to Hamas a week ago. It's believed to include a demand that Israel releases thousands of Palestinian prisoners in return for the hostages, a demand that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has previously ruled out.
In Jerusalem, protesters picket the office of the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Israel alleges UNRWA workers were involved in the October 7 attacks. The UN has launched an internal and external investigation. But a probe by Britain's Channel 4 has found no evidence of the claims that led to a tranche of countries, including Australia, withdrawing funds.
What we need to see from UNRWA now is transparent leadership in respect of their activities.
In Rafah, Israel is ramping up its assault. Gaza's southernmost city is home to hundreds of thousands of displaced people. Desperately hoping an end to this conflict is finally in sight. John Lyons, ABC News, Jerusalem.
The lawyer for a police officer charged over the fatal tasering of 95-year-old Claire Nowland says the senior constable intends to plead not guilty to manslaughter. Today, 33-year-old Christian White faced court in Cooma, where a series of other charges, including recklessly causing grievous bodily harm, were withdrawn. Mrs Nowland died in hospital last year, a week after she was tasered while holding a serrated steak knife at a nursing home in Cooma. The case against the officer, who's still suspended from duty with pay, will move to the Supreme Court in April. Most school students are settling back into their classes for the new year, but at a high school in Broken Hill, the return of students and staff has been thrown into chaos. A serious outbreak of mould at the school has forced hundreds to relocate. The Education Department is scrambling to respond to the problem, which is so bad that school buildings may need to be demolished.
Locked gates and fences surround a silent schoolyard. Williama High School is indefinitely empty after toxic mould was discovered. According to the Department of Education, the outbreak was found on January 9 and has spread rapidly since. Carpet cleaning at the school, combined with heat and humidity, is now believed to have caused the problem. Some parts of the campus might even need to be demolished.
The mould situation in Williama is extremely dangerous.
Tegan Olds has 2 children enrolled at the school and is worried.
How long has it been there for? Like, is it a safety concern for all the kids that have previously been there?
Her daughter is doing her HSC this year.
I do want her to do really well. I don't want this to interfere with any of that. but I think it's going to be a little bit of an impact.
I can understand their concern about that. I'd be concerned about it too if I had a child at that school and I was a parent of that school community.
Broken Hill councillor Daria Turley says there are still plenty of unanswered questions.
You know, how long has the mould been there, how extensive it is, what part of the buildings is it in, and then what will be the impact of the health of our students and our staff.
The Department of Education says there's no evidence mould was present before the school holidays. Daria Turley would like images of the mould released publicly.
Circulating that information will help stop a lot of rumours going around our community.
Williama students will begin returning to the classroom tomorrow and will be split between 3 other schools across the city. Senior students will be sent here to Broken Hill High, where demountables are expected to be set up by the beginning of Term 2. In the meantime, there's no avoiding the disruption. Bill Ormond, ABC News, Broken Hill.
Doctors say a visit to the GP could rise by $15 within months. That's because of a ruling by the New South Wales Revenue Office that independent GPs working in medical centres are subject to payroll tax. The ruling last year prompted the state government to freeze tax audits on clinics for 12 months. The government is negotiating a solution with doctors who say clinics could go out of business when the moratorium ends in August. But the Premier says he doesn't believe it'll come to that.
It's important to have a functioning primary healthcare sector in the state. It takes pressure off our public hospital system. That's not going to be the case if we whack them with a massive new tax.
It is this government who is not coming forward and giving peace of mind to our GPs, who are crying out for information about how their practice will be impacted.
The state's ministerial code will be rewritten and MPs will face new disclosure rules under changes proposed by the New South Wales government. It's in response to recommendations by the Independent Commission Against Corruption. The ICAC found that the former Premier Gladys Berejiklian failed to disclose her personal relationship with the former Wagga Wagga MP Daryl Maguire, who'd been lobbying for government funding. Both deny wrongdoing and the former Premier is challenging the findings in court. Under the changes, the ministerial code will be updated to enshrine honesty in leadership, and the government will be legally required to respond to the ICAC's recommendations. MPs will also be forced to declare changes to their financial interests, as well as those of their family members, on a public register within 1 month. Investigators say a door that fell off a Boeing 737 MAX just after takeoff in the US last month was missing 4 key bolts. The US Transportation Safety Board says the bolts, which are meant to lock the unused door to the fuselage, appeared to be missing. The preliminary findings provide the first official look into what happened after the Alaska Airlines flight took off. The plane made an emergency landing. All 177 people on board escaped with no major injuries. The Federal Aviation Administration says it will hold Boeing accountable for any safety violations.
We've begun an audit of Boeing's production and quality control practices, and we've informed Boeing that the FAA will not grant any production expansion of the MAX until we're satisfied the quality control issues uncovered during this process are resolved.
An appeals court in the US has found that Donald Trump does not have presidential immunity in a landmark legal case in New York. The ruling means Mr. Trump can be prosecuted on charges of plotting to overturn his defeat at the 2020 election. Mr. Trump had claimed he was immune from charges for acts he said fell within his duties as president. This latest result brings him a step closer to a criminal trial. The case has been paused until at least next week to give Mr. Trump's legal team time to appeal to the US Supreme Court. After 11 hours of deliberations, the mother of an American teenager who shot 4 of his classmates dead has been found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. In the first trial of its kind, prosecutors argued she and her husband failed to prevent the shooting by giving their son a gun and ignoring the warning signs.
A mother found guilty 2 years after her child's violent crimes. Jennifer Crumbly was convicted of 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 1 for every student shot dead by her son.
It was a long time coming, but it's definitely a step toward the accountability like what we've been talking about. It's kind of been our goal the whole time.
Ethan Crumbly has already been sentenced to life in prison for killing his classmates when he was 15 years old. Prosecutors alleged he'd received the gun as a Christmas present from his parents. But when they were called to the school hours before the shooting to discuss a violent drawing he'd done, they didn't take him home or reveal that he'd been given a weapon.
There's a lot of stuff that could have easily thwarted this whole thing. It could have been stopped very easily.
This case is believed to be the first time that a parent in the US has been convicted of such serious offences over a mass shooting carried out by their child. And while gun control advocates hope it sends a warning to other parents, there's also some concern about the precedent it could set.
I understand why a prosecutor would want to try it. I mean, I have children too, and it's terrifying when we drop them off to school. We think they're safe. On the other hand, there's this kind of moral intuition that at some point you can't be responsible for somebody else's behaviour.
Ethan Crumbly's father, James Crumbly, is facing the same involuntary manslaughter charges and will go to trial next month. Jade McMillan, ABC News.
Coming up on 7:30, Sarah Ferguson sits down with the opposition leader, Peter Dutton.
Was it humiliating for you to have to stand up and support Labor's changes to the tax cuts?
Well, Sarah, we stood up for people that we want to see given assistance, and it's $15 a week. It doesn't start until July, and it addresses some of the damage that Labor's done to the economy.
The Productivity Commission says governments across Australia are failing Indigenous communities with their closing the gap policies by taking a business-as-usual approach. It's calling on governments to relinquish power and share it with Indigenous-run organisations to achieve change.
Across health, education and housing, Aboriginal-run organisations are delivering services every day under the Closing the Gap agreement. Now a damning report is criticising government for not keeping its end of the deal.
The majority of funding relating to services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people actually doesn't go to the community-controlled sector. It goes to the NGO sector, which is not us.
Aboriginal community-controlled organisations have told the Productivity Commission review of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap it's not working.
The intention was that governments would work with the Aboriginal community-controlled sector, acknowledging that they were underfunded compared to their non-Indigenous counterparts, and that has not yet happened across the entire agreement.
Closing the Gap is 15 years old. But in 2020, governments signed up to a radical overhaul, promising to share power with Indigenous-run organisations. Today's report says governments are unwilling to relinquish control and aren't revealing where and what it's spending money on.
What we need to do is hold Indigenous organisations responsible for the money that the taxpayer is giving them and stop turning a blind eye to make sure that money is being well spent.
Aboriginal community-controlled organisations are already audited. There are really, really strong controls in place.
The Productivity Commission spent 3 years looking into the effectiveness of the 2020 agreement. What was prevalent in the submissions was tension over money.
Yes, we did see examples where funding was given to external bodies outside of the Aboriginal community-controlled sector.
A message noted by the nation's leader.
We'll continue to put forward practical measures in order to close the gap, and we'll be making our statements when the Closing the Gap report is tabled shortly.
Carly Williams, ABC News.
Workers could soon be given the right to disconnect from the office and ignore phone calls and emails after hours. The Federal Parliament appears set to pass new laws granting a right to switch off as part of a broader package of industrial relations reforms.
It's a phone call that can ruin a weekend.
Hello?
And soon, workers will have the right to simply ignore it.
Millions of Australian workers give their time unpaid through their phone or their computer on weekends and outside their paid working time.
Federal Parliament looks set to pass new laws creating a right to disconnect.
What we're simply saying is that someone who's not being paid 24 hours a day shouldn't be penalised if they're not online and available 24 hours a day.
It means that you have the right to refuse to be contacted where it is unreasonable in relation to your work outside your working time.
The new laws will be fairly simple. Employers will still have the right to contact their staff out of work hours, be it via email, text or phone. But workers will have the right to simply ignore it and can't be punished for doing so. The rules recognise there can be good reasons for employers getting in touch, like shift changes or work emergencies. When disputes happen, they will ultimately be decided by the Fair Work Commission.
I think this is really, a triumph of stupidity over common sense.
Business groups and the opposition warn the rules could threaten flexibility in the workplace.
If we're genuine about flexible workplaces, if we're genuine about allowing people to take time off to go and pick up their kids from school, for instance, well then I think we've got to have sensible conversations about what rights and obligations exist.
This wasn't the government's idea. It's something the Greens negotiated into a broader IR package. It includes things like changing the way casual work is defined to better reflect a worker's actual shift patterns and setting minimum standards for gig workers, like a base rate of pay for Uber drivers and food delivery riders. Those are bigger government priorities, but a right to disconnect is something it was happy to add on. Tom Lowry, ABC News, Canberra.
Researchers are celebrating what they're calling a world-first breakthrough to treat a debilitating autoimmune disease. They've successfully reprogrammed defective cells from lupus patients by inserting a protein from healthy people. Lupus affects 1 in 1,000 Australians. Patient trials are expected to start in Melbourne in 2 years. Researchers are also confident the method could eventually be used to treat type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis.
We think it's a game changer, completely changed the way we treat not just lupus, but every other autoimmune disease potentially.
Taylor Swift fans are being told to be on the lookout. Police say ticket scams for the pop star's upcoming shows in Australia are running rampant. Police in Victoria have received at least 250 reports of ticketing scams linked to Melbourne's sold-out concerts since July last year. People who've been caught up in the scams have mostly been targeted through social media. All up, they've so far lost more than $260,000. Taylor Swift will start her Australian tour at the MCG before heading to Sydney for 4 shows at the Olympic Stadium later this month. To finance now, the Australian share market recovered from a 2-day losing streak, and the planned $80 billion merger between the gas giants Woodside and Santos is off. Here's Alan Kohler.
Well, Woodside and Santos both said that they decided to end the merger discussions, but the fact that Santos shares fell 5.8% and Woodside went up suggests that Woodside is the dumper and Santos the dumpee. Elsewhere, the online fashion retailer Satir delivered a pretty good result and the shares jumped 25%. And NAB appointed a new CEO, Andrew Irvine, who's been running NAB's business bank for 3.5 years, having been hired from the Bank of Montreal. He takes over in April from Ross McEwen, who came from the Royal Bank of Scotland 4 years ago. Now, here's a chart of the Big Four bank share prices rebased to December 2019 when Ross McEwen took over. There was a moment 2 years ago when NAB snuck ahead of Commonwealth, but normal service has since been restored, with NAB in second place. Global markets mostly rose last night and today. Small moves all round on commodity markets. Gold, copper and oil up, iron ore down. And the Australian dollar snuck up a few points to 65.3 US cents. Now, there's a lot of focus at the moment on China's economic slowdown, but it's actually following a well-worn path. When Japan's and Korea's per capita GDP reached $7,000 US, their economic growth maxed out and started to decline. China is doing the same thing at the same rate. But China is not following Japan as a destination for Australian exports. It is buying twice as much as a percentage of Australian GDP as Japan did in the 70s and 80s. In fact, China is as important to the Australian economy now as Britain was in the early 20th century. And that's finance.
The A-League's record goal scorer Michelle Heyman has been selected in the Matildas squad for a crucial Olympic qualifier to replace Sam Kerr. Heyman comes into the Matildas squad for 2 games against Uzbekistan at the end of the month, which the Matildas need to win to secure a place at the Olympics. The 36-year-old Canberra United striker has scored 10 goals this season to become the first woman in the A-League to score 100 goals. Heyman hasn't played for the Matildas for 6 years, during which she took a year out of the game for mental health reasons.
I feel like I'm 21 again. It's a great feeling. It's been 6 years since I've put on the green and gold and represented my country. And for myself to get this call up was just, it's changed my life.
Another strong batting performance by Marizanne Kapp has helped South Africa build a solid total in a rain-affected second one-day international against Australia in Sydney. Rain stopped play several times and reduced the game to 45 overs each after Australia won the toss and elected to bowl. Laura Volvaert lasted 3 balls before the Proteas' middle order steadied the innings. Kapp made her 3rd straight half-century as South Africa set Australia 230 for victory. The former Australian captain Ricky Ponting says he's taken on a coaching role in the United States T20 Major Cricket League so he can be part of the sport's growth there. Ponting has been appointed coach of the Washington Freedom for the 2nd edition of the competition. The league will follow the Men's T20 World Cup, which will be held in the US and the Caribbean. Ponting believes the Major League Cricket will help the sport's bid to crack the American market.
I'd heard a lot about it, heard a lot of great things about it. And I think it's just the tip of the iceberg was where cricket potentially heads in the US. So I just felt it was a really good opportunity for me to get involved now.
2 fishermen have had a rare close encounter with a whale shark off the east coast of Queensland. Thomas D'Amelio was fishing with a friend in waters near Gari when the curious creature swam right up to his boat. The ocean's largest fish are most often seen off WA, but occasionally are spotted on the east coast.
Dude, this is
the
crazy.
whale shark swam a couple of laps around the boat before making its way, leaving the fishermen enough time to snap a few pictures of the once-in-a-lifetime encounter. Let's take a look at the weather now. And Tom, the waters off the coast are feeling pretty tropical.
Yeah, Jeremy, those warm waters, which have helped to bring our humid summer, well, they're currently up to 3 degrees above normal, up to 28 degrees across the northern Tasman. Now, that's equal to the warmth normally seen off the tropical Queensland coast, and it's comfortably above the 26.5 degrees required for the formation of a tropical cyclone. Thankfully, there are other ingredients in a cyclone and no systems will form anytime soon. But while we're discussing the ocean temperatures heading out into the Pacific, well, we still have a warm El Niño signal along the equator. But the latest model updates have this area of ocean rapidly cooling during autumn. Now, here is a forecast from the EC model for winter. It shows sea surface temperatures compared to average. Now, note this tongue of cool water off the coast of South America. That's the reverse of the current pattern and would indicate a developing La Niña, which, as we know, typically brings wetter conditions to Australia. The only issue is seasonal forecasts are least reliable through the first few months of the year. But you don't need La Niña for rain. Plenty of it so far this week. And to 9 a.m, Taree saw 23 millimetres, while Tocal's 49 millimetres was their heaviest fall in 12 months. The state enjoyed cooler southerly winds today. Sydney's minimum of 18 was the lowest in 2 weeks. 25 for a maximum was 1 below average. 22 at the airport and 25 in Penrith were both 4 below. It was mostly dry, apart from late showers near the beaches. Now, statewide minimums were very chilly for summer in the south. Bombala, too, was 8 below normal. The maximums were as much as 12 below the average across the Hunter today, thanks to cloud cover and rain. So on the satellite, well, we do have cloud lingering over northeast New South Wales, and it is bringing further showers tonight to the ranges around the Hunter and the mid-north coast. On the chart tomorrow, onshore winds and a pair of troughs will bring further showers and storms to the state's north. So around the country then, showers ahead for Brisbane and the start of a severe heatwave in Perth. They're heading for 39. For the northeast tomorrow, chance of showers on the coast and the eastern ranges. It's only a slight chance for the Hunter, but possibly tending to rain areas around the northern rivers. For the southeast, a cool night down to the teens for most regions and below 10 across the Alps. A partly cloudy day to follow with tops in the low to mid-20s. To the west, the chance of thunderstorms north of about Cobar. Heaviest falls will be up around Bourke tomorrow. Warm and sunny across the south with highs in the low 30s. On the waters, we'll have strong winds off the far north coast and seas up to 2.5 metres. Now for Sydney tomorrow, a mostly cloudy day but staying dry. Southerly winds to 30 kilometres per hour. Temperature range 20 to 25 degrees for the city. A top of 23 on the beaches and 26 in Penrith, Wollongong, a top of 23. The sun will rise at 6:21, setting at 7:56, and ahead partly cloudy on Friday, 26 to 28 degrees. Now a shower or two returning on Saturday, 25 to 26. Then it's back to mostly dry weather on Sunday. That's ahead of warmer conditions developing early next week. We're back up into the low 30s. Jeremy.
Tom, thank you. Here's Sarah Ferguson with 7:30.